Welcome to another episode of Let's Parlay, where we're here to encourage you to bet on yourself and pursue all that life has in store for you. For this episode, I'm going to talk about some things that I have come to realize, some realizations when it comes to what I may be idolizing, and some things that maybe you can take with you to reflect on what you may be idolizing. Also, going to share some analytics from the podcast that I thought were pretty interesting, and share a little bit about what I've gotten from the Bible as well too. So buckle up. We're going to have ourselves a great episode. Hope you enjoy. And without further ado, let's parlay. All right, family. So we're here for episode 18. Appreciate you tuning in as always. As I've been doing recently with my episode, as I've been doing recently with these episodes, I have been just sharing some of the takeaways and tidbits that I'm learning week to week in my own experience, and I'm going to do the same thing for this episode as well too. So hope you guys enjoy what we're going to get into today. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about was just being careful what we idolize. So just to tee this up for you, I am a huge, sports fan, football and basketball mainly. I've gotten into baseball a little bit here and there. And that's just from when I was younger, especially on my dad's side of the family. Like football was such a huge thing, especially when I was playing younger. Like I used to think about when I was, pretty much 8 until I'd say 10 until like around 14. I would have my like pee wee football Sundays and Saturday games and stuff like that, and it was just such a huge thing to bring both sides of my family together. And for me, it was just really special, and it was, kind of held like a nice place in my heart because it was the first time that I would see like my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family all in one home, and it kind of just, was a rare thing for me to experience. So I think for me, like my attachment towards football and especially football Sundays has been a very consistent, aspect of my life. And what I've also realized as well too is that that's been consistent regardless of where I move, regardless of my situation. Is like it's almost like a sacred thing to have my time where I'm watching football. And then when NFL Red Zone came out, which if you're not familiar with that, it pretty much is like just like football for anyone who just wants constant dopamine throughout a Sunday, because there's so many games on at 1 o'clock Eastern time. So it's just showing every highlight as it's happening live, just keeping you updated on all the different things that are happening simultaneously. So it's just a lot of information, and it could be a lot for other people, but for someone who's into football and has always watched it, it's just a constant dopamine hit. But the reason why I'm bringing all this stuff up is because I've just had to really check myself when it comes to how I prioritize that time. Like I've mentioned that having a Sabbath rest and having a 24-hour period where I am not dedicated towards any work or, checking my phone and doing all that sort of stuff, which I'm still working on. I'm not, perfect by any means when it comes to that. But I realized that, even on those football Sundays, it almost feels as if like the games just kind of take me. It doesn't allow me to kind of reflect on much else. I will tend to, do some work or try to balance it out with doing some other stuff while I'm watching, but it could be very easy to just sit there and watch because it's so entertaining and because I've always been a fan and had that attachment towards it. And yeah, the reason why I'm sharing this is because I started to feel like I was almost idolizing it a little bit too much, where the drama behind each player's story became very, I became very invested in it, if that makes sense, right? So, like, my personal favorite is Lamar Jackson. I just have always appreciated like how authentic he is. He's also a man of Christ, and he's not afraid to talk about that. and just a very unique player, and also just a unique personality. He's from Florida. You can tell that through and through every time he speaks. Ain't no doubt, ain't no doubt about that. And I just always like appreciated, like his rise when it comes to being in the NFL. And I root for him heavily. But I started realizing, like, man, like, why, you know, this really doesn't have any impact or any bearing on my life, but yet I feel so emotionally invested into it. And I don't want to have anything just have such a strong power over me like that, to where it starts to affect me emotionally, where I'm watching the games and I can literally feel my heart rate rising as I'm watching him, take a snap on fourth down. It's just like, this is just too much. So for me, it made me like step back and realize, like, like, I think I've invested a little bit too much emotional energy into this. I think it's cool to, keep track and follow along from a distance. And if I have time to watch a game, go ahead and do that. But to the point where I was like, when are they playing? Like, I definitely want to see that game and all that sort of stuff, or just, any football in general on a Sunday. I just started to reflect a little bit more on, is this something that I really want to be investing so much of my time and energy into? Because, I mean, on Sunday, you can spend up to 7, 8 hours just sitting there watching football. Obviously, you can do other things in between, but that is just a lot of time for one thing to be taking up. Now, it wasn't that much for me, it's kind of like a balance of other things that I'm doing while watching, but still, it's something that I've dedicated that much time to. And then I thought about it and I was like, man, like, I dedicate all that time to football, and it gives me something that I feel like I need in that moment that I just can't be without. But what about the time that I could be like focused and dedicated towards my business, my relationship with God, with family, with all these other things, and how much that could be elevated as a priority in my life, and how much time and emotional energy that I'm spending into that. So I just looked at it and was like, I got to be careful with this sort of thing. Take a step back, be aware, and not make anything my idol. Not make any sport or anything outside of God something that I just praise and worship that much that I put everything else aside for it. So yeah, just I wanted to share a little bit of that for you, or with you, I should say, because that's my thing. For others, especially for the ladies out there, it could be reality TV. It could be whatever it is that you spend a lot of time and a lot of emotional energy following. Um, there's so much opportunity for you to possibly take a step back and just not have it just grasp so much of your mental energy and time and focus, because there's only one thing that deserves that much energy and that much focus, and that's God. And I don't want anything else to be in the way of that relationship. So I wanted to share that with you just because it's something that's been on my mind, and maybe some people can resonate with it as well too. So hopefully that helps. I also wanted to share with y'all some analytics just that I took some time to review when it came to this podcast, mainly the YouTube channel. I haven't looked at Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all that sort of stuff too much, but I started running through the analytics for this podcast and some of the shorts that I post as well too. And the results were pretty surprising. I guess in hindsight, it makes sense, but I didn't expect that to be the case based off of who I've spoken to about the show, um, and maybe some of the content of the show as well too, and my clients, etc. But yeah, I have about 80% of my viewership is men when it comes to the YouTube channel. And I found that to be really surprising because obviously most of my clients are women. And then even outside of that, I speak to my mom, I speak to my brother about the podcast, my father, but I don't speak to many guys about the podcast and if they watch it. So I don't even know if it's people within my close circle or not, or if it's just stumbling upon male viewers who maybe follow me from different platforms, or who don't even follow the channel or whatever have you. So I just found that to be very interesting, and especially the age range. It seems like the majority of the folks who are watching it are between the ages of around 24 and 35, which I'm not surprised about that because that just seems to be the age group that watches podcasts in general. And then same thing when it comes to male viewership. It seems as though men consume podcast material a little bit more than women do. So that's probably the reason for those results. And it also just made me think a little bit more about, what I will begin to, open up a little bit more about and what I'll share more about. And it's also made me reflect a little bit about my content in general and who I want to speak to most passionately. I've had some conversations with friends who are, also entrepreneurs who are also marketing and running ads and doing all that sort of stuff and know how to write copy. And they've given me a lot of perspective because for me, my brain is so like math and science, X's and O's, and not so much into like the soft skills when it comes to like creativity and words and things of that nature. Like when I was in school, it was physics, math, and pretty much those two subjects that like I would crush. That just came natural to me. But when it came to writing a paper or designing a presentation and all that, like your boy's a little off. Okay, so that's just me being humble and honest with you. Anyway, so I've had some conversations, um, with those folks about like the direction of my content and what I share about. And I think I will start to adjust things. I don't know if it's going to be anytime immediately or if it's going to be, some weeks or some time away, but I think I'm starting to feel a little bit more of a passion to speak directly towards men of Christ because there's a lot that's going on in our society, and I think uh, men in general are definitely struggling a lot, and we tend to struggle alone. And I've definitely experienced that even recently, where I don't feel comfortable or I don't have that inclination to talk to anybody about my issues. Um, but I also feel as though there's a lot of men who try to do things on our own and especially do it without God. And that to me is a very dangerous spot to be in. And I think that's what leads men to do very horrible things. Like if you look at the crime statistics, like majority of crimes are committed by men, especially violent crimes. And I think that is very much a result of a lot of solitude. I think that's a result of a lot of men trying to figure out their own problems on their own. And really, the core of it is men just separating themselves from God. I think if we had a lot more Christ like conversations, honest, bold conversations with men about their purpose, about the direction that they could pursue, what matters most, what we should be valuing, I think there will be a lot of change in society in general, and I think that there would be, as a consequence, I should say, a lot of other people would be positively benefiting from that as well too. So that includes, women, children, the elderly, because then there will be men to step up and solve a lot of the problems that we're facing at this moment. And yeah, it's made me reflect a lot as well too. I mean, I've thought about uh, the men in my family and just hearing the different stories on both of my parents' side, and just how the absence of God and the worship of like temporary satisfaction has impacted everybody else within the circle of those men in my family personally. And that's something that I plan to break as a generational trend, is to be a lot more others focused and not so much selfish and rooted in my own desires and trying to do things without God in my life. Because I've just seen how that plays out for the men in my family, and how it plays out for just men in general. So, all that to say that I think I feel a little bit more of a pull to speak a bit more directly to you fellas. And I also think that that allows me to speak a bit more honestly, because I think with guys, we appreciate hearing it straight, although we can get offended just as much as anybody, and we could be just as sensitive. I think there's a type of conversation and a type of there's a type of conversation that I think men can have amongst each other that is a bit more blunt, a bit more straightforward, and I feel a little bit more comfortable speaking from that position, as opposed to trying to, soften the blow with folks who may feel a little bit more sensitive to what I say. So, anyway, those are just some of my thoughts when it comes to the direction of my content, and whether that be within this podcast or on IG or TikTok. That could also impact the people that I begin working with when it comes to um, my faith-based coaching programs. I think there's going to be a lot of benefit that comes from that change and that shift in direction. So stay tuned for all of that. I mean, I'm not going to drastically, change anything, to where I'm not talking about things that actually matter, that are not Christ-centered. But I think it'll just be a little bit more catered towards helping the fellas out, because I think that we need it the most these days, given the circumstances. So, and that also ties into what I've been reading and what I've been learning, in my Bible reading and my scriptures and my devotionals and such. I've finally gotten into the Gospels, which, thank God. I don't know if anybody has read through all of the Old Testament, but this year I got through all of it. And it's not like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I read it physically, from the Bible. I was in the YouVersion app and went through, and am currently going through a 365-day reading plan for the Bible. So for me, that was just a way for me to get started. Like, I just wanted to get reading the Bible, like, and just get ahead of that. So I finished the Old Testament, and I'm very happy to be in the Gospels, just because of the language, and also just hearing a little bit more about what Jesus had said, a little bit more about Jesus' story. I just wrapped up Luke yesterday, and Luke gave a lot of context to, like, Jesus before he, started his ministry, and all of that, and what his upbringing was like, and how it even came to be, with Mary, and even with John the Baptist, and how his parents had been blessed with an opportunity to bring a child into this world. So it just, it was very eye opening for me, and I thought that, as I've continued to read through the Gospels, I've realized that there's a lot of similarities between what Jesus goes through and what men of Christ are kind of going through in today's age as well too. And when I think about Jesus, like, there were so many times, between Matthew, Luke, um, all of the different gospels, where Jesus really offended a lot of people by what he was saying. And he offended people because he was also bold in what he was saying. He was very confident. He talked about, him being sent from the Father, and having that relationship very confidently, because he knew. And that definitely offended a lot of the folks who, were of the religious side of things, the Pharisees, the people who were very much focused on, like, the rituals, and only doing things a certain way because of, their interpretation of the scriptures and whatnot, and how man-made it started to become. And when Jesus came and started to speak as boldly as he did about his purpose and him being the living word and his relationship with the Father, it just completely offended those people. And it led to the point where they said, enough is enough. This guy has to go. And ultimately led to his crucifixion. And I think about that and I'm like, man, like, not as anybody of Christ, but specifically as men of Christ, like, we are called to embody as much as we can Jesus's life, and be as Christ-like as we possibly can. And I just thought about that from my own perspective, and I was like, man, like, I shouldn't be afraid or I shouldn't be concerned about offending and making people feel uncomfortable, because that's exactly what we're called to do as being men of Christ. Now that doesn't mean coming from a place of judgment and trying to, strike down and smite people. That's not our job. But at the same time, it does require us to, one, know the word, secondly, have a relationship with the Lord, and then three, to be bold about what we know and what we know to be true, and to share that as much as we possibly can. Share the gospel, create disciples. And that just requires a different level of boldness that I feel a lot of men of faith right now are missing. And I think a lot of you are struggling with this because, you don't want to offend people. You don't want to, be crucified, whether it be socially or, in any other sense from your society, and I think that that's a part of the mission that comes with being a follower of Christ, is that we are going to face our time where people are going to try to throw stones and try to make it seem like, what you're doing and what you're saying is completely wrong. And even within, the religion of Christianity, there might be people who are of that nature, who are false prophets, who are trying to tell you that, I mean, I heard somebody say something wild the other day, and it came at a perfect time. Like, I was so thankful that God allowed me to see things in the order that I did, where this pastor had talked about how Jesus was out of order until, he started his ministry. Like, he wasn't doing what he was called to do before, he turned 30 and started, before he got baptized by John the Baptist and stuff. And I was like, that sounds kind of wild. And then I remember the next day I was in Luke, and I think it was Luke chapter 2, where, essentially Mary and Joseph had went on a trip and somehow lost Jesus. It's kind of crazy, but they lost Jesus somewhere, and they went back to find him. And when they found him, I believe he was, and correct me if I'm wrong on all this. Like, go into Luke chapter 2 if you want for yourself, but I believe he was listening to different ministers and whatnot. Like, he was sitting there kind of like as a kid, just learning. And I think I remember Mary saying, like, what are you doing? Like, why didn't you come with us, or something like that? And I'm paraphrasing. And Jesus was like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's him as a child. So again, like, it just, we just got to be careful. This is why it's so important for us to read our Bibles and to have our own personal relationship with the Lord and with Christ, because in today's age, there's so many different people claiming to know so much about the word and so much about, um, how we should be interpreting the Bible and interpreting, Jesus and what he came here to do. And until you read it for yourself, it doesn't hit the same, because then you start to idolize and worship whoever it is that's delivering the message, as opposed to the word itself and your own relationship with God. So I just wanted to encourage everyone, and anyone who is a believer, anyone who even isn't a believer and just is still curious, is like just to read it for yourself and go through that own go through that journey for yourself, so that you could really um, have confidence in whatever it is that you may hear outside of what you're reading, but also so that you can walk boldly in what you know to be true. And to me, ever since I've gotten so consistent in reading the Bible, it's made me a lot more reassured about my beliefs and why they also make sense and the consequence of not believing those things. And you just start to view things from that lens. And it's like, oh, like that's why people are struggling. That's why these communities or certain cultures may not necessarily, allow for people to feel at peace, or why there's so much violence in certain cultures or in certain countries. Like it's just like, oh, like these people are missing God. They need Jesus. I mean, that's really all they need. Um, so for me, that's something that I've come across recently, and just want to encourage any men who are watching this, that if you haven't been consistent with uh, reading your Bible, or if you haven't gone on that quest for the knowledge yourself, I just really encourage you to do that, because we're in a time where there are so many different influences and people who are going to try to convince you otherwise. And unless you read it yourself, or unless you go on that deep dive yourself, people can sway you easily. You can become open game essentially. So I just wanted to encourage all my men out there that we have a lot of responsibility in our position in the kingdom of heaven, and just wanted to encourage you to keep on doing what you're doing, if you're pursuing God, if you're pursuing the Word, and to be bold in what you believe, and not to be scared of offending folks, because you're going to offend somebody down the line either way. So that is all I have for today. As always, if anyone's looking to work with me as their coach, my Fit and Faith program has been great. I'm really appreciative of my clients. I always drop the link in the description for the podcast for anyone who is interested in applying for coaching. So feel free to reach out. But otherwise, just appreciate you listening. Hopefully, this was of value to you. And more than anything, hope that you've been encouraged to, bet on yourself, pursue a Christ-like life, and yeah, just attain all that you are hoping to attain. So appreciate you for listening. Take care. Adios.